Anybody who missed it at the start, this is my first ever talk. I'm very nervous of public speaking, so it's amazing actually. Even just doing this bit, my heart's going up straight away. It's fascinating. Not even on a stage, so it's clearly not the stage that does it. I pre-recorded this talk in order to try and get over some of those nerves, but you'll notice them a little bit at the start. There's about 2 minutes 30 of intro of who I am, and then it goes into like a kind of coffee shop chat of some of the questions, Q&As about recruitment, and hopefully it'll be quite helpful to you all. Bear with me on the intro because I thought 2.5 minutes was a good amount of time, but having watched it back, it seems a little long. So if you need to make a cup of tea, the first 2.5 minutes is probably the time to do it. I'll be around afterwards. I'm more than happy to answer questions, or if you've got anything burning, feel free to stick it in the chat box and I'll see if I can type along. Right, now let's see if I can do this proper. Hello, lrug. Welcome to my sofa talk about Recruitment 101. I've been working with companies doing recruitment for about 15 years now, and there are some recurring questions I thought it could be useful to bundle into a video that may help either you when you're recruiting, or when you're working in companies and you've been asked to get involved in recruitment, to do recruiting a little less painfully than it actually sometimes seems to be. Why would I be able to tell you about this? Well, my name's Thea. I founded and run a company called Team Prime. We're a company that helps others with the human side of digital technology. I started out in my career as a programmer in the first .com boom in London at the end of the 90s, and done many roles other than programming, as you do in a startup. I've been a technical project manager. I've done UI design in the past for my sins. I'm not very good at that. Product development, and even back in the day, Perl hacking and a lamp stack developer, but that was 20 years ago, so, you know, don't hold it against me. I moved into recruitment after having some pretty gnarly experiences that I'm sure are normal to all of you as well, where people would call me up and ask me to come and do a Java-based role purely on the fact that I had OO programming on my CV and silly things like that. It wasted my time, it was frustrating, and I didn't really understand why recruiting had to be so painful when really it's quite a fun thing to be doing, to grow a company or to find a new job. I've been really lucky. I've worked with some great companies. I've worked with Nokia. I've worked with, back in the day when they were, really big. I suppose they still are, but you know what I mean. Apple. I've worked with Intercom, The Guardian, SH24 more recently, Bernardo, Stripe, the government, a whole bunch of places. I've worked with little companies that are, a couple of people big starting out, all the way through to hundreds of folks in a technical team. But my normal area is kind of a 50-person company with a 10 to 15 amount of technical folks working for them. And I've also been really lucky to work with some of the greats. I worked with Sir Tim Berners-Lee about 10, 15 years ago, opening up the UK's data, which was great fun. And I've been very lucky to build some of Jimmy Wales' teams, and he's awesome to work with, a really good, fun guy. So the point of me doing Team Prime about 11, 12, 13 years ago was to make recruiting new people to your company and being recruited into a company delightful. And I can imagine there's a few smirks right now, because recruitment feels like anything other than delightful sometimes, most of the time. But that's not how it should be. And I think with the right effort and forethought and the right communication, that recruitment can be delightful. I mean, if you think about it, you're building a company and you get to work with amazing people who want to work with you. And that's a really cool thing. But sadly, communication gets in the way, or time screws things up, and we lose a bunch of what could be quite good to bad process. So I work with both companies and the folks they're hiring. The main thing I like to try and do is bring back transparency and joy to recruitment. And yeah, welcome to my talk. So, I'm a startup. How do I hire cost and time effectively? This is something I hear a lot, because obviously recruitment is an extremely expensive thing to do. not just if you're using a recruiter through fees, but like generally through lost time, lost productivity, staff training. Oh goodness, there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's paying for advertisements and the lost productivity on a client or a project if you don't have the right people in place. So yeah, I guess it's a lot. It's a frustrating one because of that effectively. If you want to hire effectively, then essentially you need to invest some time into making sure that you're communicating correctly about what the role is, who your company is. The pay is super important. A lot of people, and it just baffles me to this day, leave pay off their adverts. It's like the one major thing that people want to know is, can this company afford me? Do they pay correct fees for what they're hiring for? You know, people aren't daft. If you leave a salary off a role, what you're essentially saying is either we pay so low we daren't tell you, or we will pay you based on how well you negotiate, which is not a great tactic for 90% of the developers who are going to apply for your role. So how to hire cost and time effectively. Make sure that you're putting a lot of time up front in things like writing a great job advert. Make sure you're tapping into your network and asking them who they know, who they've worked with, anybody in their team that's going to be good to work with again. But try and make that as diverse as possible, which can be quite hard, because what you don't want is to hire a load of people that look just like you, because you've essentially hired through your network. So think about different folks you've worked with from different backgrounds and ask them about their networks and how that can work. And then make sure that you're talking about it in social as much as possible, but not just like, oh my God, come and work with me, we're the best, like everybody always does. But actually talk about the problems that you're looking to solve and the things that you're struggling with. As strange as that sounds, people often want jobs based on the problems they can solve and what they can bring to a role. So it's not actually about joining the best company in the world. Oh, my cat wants to go out and is crying. Can you hear that? Come here. See, people speaking on stage don't have this problem, do they? Come here. So yeah, tell people about the problems, tell them about the challenges, tell them about things you're struggling with and how they can help make your company better. Be humble. Don't always, just say, look, we're brilliant, you should want to come and join us because we're the best. I think that's the biggest tip I would give. I know, we can all hear you. Come here. I'm back. I got rid of the cat. It's fine. I mean, didn't get rid of the cat. I just fed the cat. Okay, so where was I? Okay, what does a good interview process look like? I like this question. It's really important because if you're thinking about your interview process, then you're starting to think along the right lines of what candidate experience feels like. These are people that want to come and work for your company. So it's really important from the outset you treat them really well and show them why they should want to come and work with you rather than your competitor. At the same time, you should be obviously finding out the right things about them, not just asking them 5 times in a row from different interviewers why they're applying for this job. Think about your questions, think about the people involved in your interview process. Ideally, you should have a spread of seniority and a spread of gender, and if you can, a spread of colour. That's really helpful, because if everybody doing the interview is a white male who is, roughly the same age and of the same background, then their unconscious bias is going to filter on the same thing. So if you can manage to find, maybe a junior programmer who can do an interview, as well as the CEO, as well as a product person, get some women involved, get some people of colour, etc. Then you see how your person interviewing interacts with different parts of your company, not just with you. And you might be surprised at how that works in actual sense. It's quite interesting to see how people react to juniors, for example, versus seniors. And why that's important is if you're hiring a senior developer, for example, you're going to want to be able to make sure that they can mentor and look after other people in their team. That's super important. But also, how people communicate and how they work in teams is as important, if not more so, than the code that they write. So a process that is purely looking at people on a technical function is not really going to find you the best folks you can possibly find. And on that note, different people perform differently under different circumstances. I've had people with, strong anxiety issues that struggle to do co-pairing or tests as part of an interview process, but they're perfectly fine with that as part of a job once they know someone. So it's about how do we make people feel comfortable as part of our process to get the best out of them. For the majority of folks, a code test is perfectly fine, although be aware that for developers, if they're interviewing at, say, 2 or 3 companies and they've got 2 or 3 2-hour code tests to do, you're asking quite a lot of their time. So don't just ping the code test over as the very first thing they see. Give them an interview fast with somebody in a company like the CTO or the CEO who can at least do a sort of pre-sell, if you like, on what the business is, and give them that gusto to go ahead and do a really good technical test for you. Why should they care? Why should they want to spend that effort on your company if you can't even tell them a bit about what you're doing? Generally, from a sort of specifically structured point of view, over the years, one of the best interview processes I've found was when I mostly stole from a lovely chap called Joel Chippendale, who was working at FutureLearn at the time. And that was essentially, the bit I stole was that they used to do a half day on site. It actually started off as a full day. And I remember being terrified when they told me I'd have to find people who would interview doing a full day on site for no pay. I was like, oh my goodness, no one's going to want to do this. Actually, they did, and people loved it because it meant that they could go in and work alongside folks that they were going to invest, part of their career in, and made their decisions easier for them as well. It got reduced down to a half day, which then got reduced down to about 2 to 3 hours, which is about right. And I've settled on that now over the sort of years of refining interview processes. But roughly how it looks is a first call with either your recruiting human, if you've got one, and that might be a recruitment agent like me, or it might be your HR folks internally. If you don't have one of those, then whoever the founder is, or if you're very tiny, just whoever the hiring manager might be. And that first call is just to determine a few basic things. You want to find out, is the salary range what they're hoping for? There's nothing worse than getting to the end of 4 or 5 interviews and finding that you're both completely in the wrong zones when it comes to money. That's not okay. So salary range, do they know what the job is actually about? And by that I mean, talk to them about what you think it is, not just what the spec says, because specs and jobs are often not necessarily the same thing. Often specs are written years before and then used again and again and again every time you hire, and the job's maybe moved on. So have an actual chat about the daily role of the job, the weekly and the monthly role. Make sure it's what they're expecting. If there's any gotchas in the job, like things like on call or working on weekends or being on site a couple of times a week in the non-plague times, then make sure that that's all talked about up front, because again, you don't want to get through 4 or 5 interviews with someone who's brilliant and they love you and you love them, and then you find out that they just won't do on call. Let's get all that stuff out up front. Make sure that it fits with where this person is going. Where do they want to be in a year or two's time? Does this job have the same trajectory as that? And now my phone's beeping. I'm really bad at this. I'm sorry, Alvo. Let me turn my phone off. Here we go. And do you have the same values? Do they have the same company values, where they want to go, what they're working on? Will they fit in with the team values? And that's different from culture, I think. I'm not a huge believer in culture, which might be a bit of a shock. But for me, culture is something that is evolving and free-flowing, and people make your culture. This person's going to make it. So it's no good sort of just hiring the same folks who have the same viewpoints, which is often what culture is taken to mean. But instead look at values, like where do they sit on work ethics or products they want to work on, or things they've done in the past. How do they deal with criticism, that kind of stuff. But in your first half hour, just get a guiding rod on that stuff. After that, then if you do a code test, now is a good time to chuck them a code test if you like them. And after the code test, some sort of code test review, if they did well enough that you want to invest more time to do that. And that review should just be talking through them with maybe one of your lead developers or another software engineer in the company. what they thought they were doing and how they felt they handled it, and any problems they had along the way. And that's really important, that code tests aren't about creating perfect code, but about how they solved the problem in this scenario, and things they may or may not have done differently or got wrong, or had time to do it differently, they might have done something else. It's about that communication again. It's not always, well, it's not ever really about finding perfect code. I'd be kind of worried if we found someone who did perfect code, because I'm not entirely convinced that exists on the first time round. When you've managed to get through that part, then the last part is that on-site I was talking about at the beginning. So in the non-corona times, that would have been an actual half-day on site, usually done perhaps after lunch, where somebody would code pair with either one of the developers or a junior dev, or work with a product person in order to take some of their thoughts and, you know, start looking at how that code might hang together based on that, on the product they're thinking about. It can be done on code that's actually, you know, in production, just obviously not push live until everybody's happy. Or it could just be sat down and talking through things. In the plague times, in our current working from home joy, this is done by usually 2 separate video calls, an hour long each. Again, one with perhaps a lead dev and one with perhaps a product person or a designer or something like that, with maybe a 15-minute break in the middle for, you know, going to the loo or whatever, having a cup of tea, having a breather. Because don't forget, interviews are quite hard work on the person being interviewed. I know they're hard work for us as well doing the interview, but we're the one in the position of power, so we should always make sure that we're looking after the other person who's, you know, running on quite high adrenaline, to try and make us happy. By giving them breaks and being kind and trying to get the best out of them, as opposed to just putting them under pressure to perform something for, you know, reasons. And then an offer. And I think what's really important about all these stages is that if at any point somebody fails to pass an interview stage, you should let them know really as soon as you can with good feedback. And good feedback means feedback as to why they couldn't do that role. And if it's a technical reason, then maybe some pointers on where they could study and get better in order to come back and do that role. If it's a personal reason, be a little careful about how you go about feeding that back. You have to be a bit careful about upsetting people or offending people and your own personal biases. So, yeah. That's a tough one, the personal feedback. Generally, I would recommend not bothering giving any personal feedback. If there is a real personal issue with somebody, you just didn't get on, or they were extremely rude in the call, you don't just say, thank you very much, but you're not the strongest of our other candidates at the moment, but thank you so much for your time. Still try and be kind and polite where you can. And like I say, if it's a technical thing, just give people pointers. If people are successful, then again, give them an offer. Give them an offer within 24 hours of their final interview. Don't leave them hanging. Good people are being snapped up even now. Like, recruiting's off the hook at the moment. I've never been busier. So, you know, make sure you get that offer in. Make sure you look keen, because you should be keen. This is a great person coming to join your company. I would hope that an interview process, and where I try and advise and push my clients to do it, is within, you know, a week to 2 weeks maximum. If you're making people wait a week for each part of your interview process, it doesn't look like you're that interested, for a start. And secondly, you're just going to lose that candidate. They're going to go somewhere else. If they're a good human, then, you know, other people want them. So being interested and being keen is not a bad thing at all. It's actually a really good thing. So bear that in mind. And same goes for the offer. You know, if somebody asks for 80K, and you offer them 70 when they faced, you know, a bunch of interviews, they're not going to feel like that's a good starting foot to go on. You might have saved yourself £10,000, but is it really worth it in the goodwill or losing that person at all? Which is why at the start, having that discussion about salaries is super important, because if they want 80 grand and you know you can only afford 70, that's a discussion you should have at the beginning. But if they want 80 grand and they've interviewed well, offer them £80,000. Or, you know, I've been very lucky to work with some excellent companies where I've had juniors or mid-level people, you know, with 2-3 years experience, who have asked for really lower than their experience level dictated. And those companies, when I advised them to offer higher than what the person asked for, did. And that's brilliant. I mean, that's how it should be. Think about the goodwill, think about if you want diversity and you get a woman or a person of colour, for example, asking for lower than the rate that you would have paid somebody who was, a white male just because they asked for more money, then make sure you pay that person that money too. Don't just think, I've just saved, 5 or 10 grand because they don't know how to negotiate or because they were paid lower before. That's not cool. You will get, so much more in having an equal and wonderful, diverse workforce than you will from saving 10 grand by trying to shaft somebody or thinking you're making a saving. So yeah, good offers. Make good offers. Know what you're doing from the start with the money and do that interview process stage. Okay, next question. How do I work with a recruiter? Now, this is a cheeky one because actually nobody ever asks me this, and I think they should. So I've put it in. I hope you'll indulge me on that one. Recruiters are funny old beasts. Most recruiters, like 90 to 95%, say a stat, that I've ever come across, are actually salespeople. They're not programmers, they're not technical. They may have a passing interest, but that's not, if you look at their background, check them out on LinkedIn, you'll see that either they've gone into recruiting straight out of university or some other path, but it's very rare to find a recruiter who's actually done a technical role in their past or been part of a technical product team, which is a shame, really, because I think they're the folks who make the best recruiters because they know what they're talking about. So once we realise that actually what we're dealing with a recruiter is a salesperson, and we frame it in our minds that way, I think it's a lot easier to work out how to deal and engage with a recruiter. So the thing that a recruiter is trying to do, particularly as a salesperson, is make money. And the way that they make money is they charge your company a commission, usually somewhere between 15 and 25% of the first annual salary that somebody places. So let's say I place a £60,000 developer. I'm paid 15% commission or 20% commission. So I'm going to get between 9 and 12 grand for that person. So that's a lot of money, right? So if you're a recruiter and you're a sales-led recruiter, because you can say mostly a salesperson, then the main goal you're looking at is how do you make that money? And for a lot of people, it's around things like sending lots and lots of CVs, hoping something will stick. It might be cold calling you to try and get your business. It might be being quite pushy with you as a candidate to make sure you'll get that job or take an offer when it's being given to you, even if it's not necessarily, exactly your dream job or something. So the best thing you really want to do is engage with them as much as possible. Sell your company to them, sell your processes, sell everything that you need to, give them everything, org charts, give them anything about your company values. Really try and embed your company into that person so that when they are doing that sales process, that it's more coming from your mouth than from theirs, because you want as much of the truth coming through them as possible. Rates wise, I find it really interesting. Companies often, well, actually I don't know so much now, but certainly about 10 years ago when I knew more about recruiting agencies, I don't really have to deal with them anymore, thankfully. But when I did, companies would work on trying to push people's rates down from like 20% to 18 or 18 to 15 or 25 to 20, whatever. And I always found this kind of fascinating because the amount that you're saving by forcing that rate down is not a huge amount. It's a couple of grand or so on a 10 grand fee, which I realise sounds like a lot, but really when you think about the whole recruiting thing and the amount of money that you've already invested in time, extra 2 grand's not a huge amount. But the difference it makes the recruiter is quite high because most recruiters work in an agency where they are tasked on making and only often working with the highest commission-based rates. So you potentially go from having a recruiter work for you and do a really good job and send you some of the best candidates at 20% to somebody kind of going, meh, I'll give that one a try at 18 later if my other 20% client doesn't work out. or getting, the second and third best, or the people who didn't place at other places, because it's better for a salesperson to recruit at the 20% mark. So they'll prioritize those clients. So for the sake of, like I say, £2,000, you've just possibly lost hiring. So it's an interesting thing to think about. I just don't, commission's such a pain anyways when it comes to recruitment. I really find it kind of gross, but you have to play that game, and that game is that you want to get the best candidates as quickly as possible. And if that means going at a 20% rate instead of an 18, then just do it. And if a recruiter's not working out for you, then don't work with them and don't keep them on your PSL. The only reason bad recruiters are in business is because they're making money somewhere. And if you're taking a CV on spec from a recruiter you've never worked with on a 15% rate and shafting all the recruiters you normally work with on a PSL, like, you're keeping those bad people, bad people, that's a bit rude, but you're keeping the less than helpful recruiters in business. So don't do that. Just prioritize the people that you like to work with and really help them to recruit for you. Build a strong relationship. So that's what I'd always say. I used to make clients laugh, because with a lot of mine, I'm quite lucky. They're like, not family, but like work family, I guess. I'd go to Christmas parties, I'd turn up at the offices with like cakes, I'd get invited to away days. And that's how it should be. Your recruiters should be part of your fam. They're like the folks who are selling your business. They're the folks who are coming to work for you. They're kind of doing one of the most important jobs, which is finding great people for you to grow your business and your team. And as somebody working within that business, recruiters are also the people that are finding your colleagues. So, put a bit of effort in, I suppose, is what I'm saying. Don't just wing them a spec and then barter them down on rates, because you will get a sales-led process back. And that's no good for anybody. It's not good for you. It's not good for the recruiter. They just want some solid business that they can depend on, where they can bill. And if they can do that in a really good way with you as part of your kind of team, then they will stick with you. But if you don't treat them well, the good ones will leave, because there's plenty of clients that want to work with good ones, and the bad ones will hang around, but that's no use to you. Which leads me nicely on to, and this has come up a lot in the last year, do I need to hire an internal recruiter? Yes, you probably do. So most of my initial calls with clients usually start off with me recommending the client hires an internal recruiter. Reasons being is that internal recruiters are great. They're really good. They're often ex-agency folks who didn't really enjoy some of the harder sales tactics or the way that candidates are treated, and not having enough input into candidate process. And so they've gone internal for those reasons, and to look after, more of the process and more of the candidate experience. That they usually, I've met some really great internal recruiters in my time. I think they're a good bunch, and I think they're worth having. The average cost of an internal recruiter for, say, a company hiring maybe 5 to 10 hires a year, I guess, you're looking at anywhere between 40 and 60 grand a year, which, when you think about what your hires would have cost you through paying a recruitment agent, that's just a snip, isn't it? You may as well. And you get all this other good stuff with them too. You get to really have them as part of your company. They get to tell you about other stuff like candidate process. They get to do the candidate admin side for you. They get to look after your agencies. They know how agencies work most of the time. So they can also look after the PSL, the preferred suppliers list of who should be on your agency side. And they can do all sorts of really good admin side of things, like organising interviews, making sure people are in the right place, making sure that candidates get their feedback in time. There's really no huge downside to hiring an internal recruiter. The only thing I would say is it can be a bit tough. It's a bit like hiring salespeople, insofar as you don't know if you've got a good internal recruiter, one that's effective for you and your company, for at least a month or two. Which can be an expensive mistake to make if they can't hire for you. So having a good interview process and really checking out how they're going to find people and how they're going to treat people and look after them, and if they share your company values, is so important when you're hiring an internal recruiter, because they're really going to be the first thing that anybody knows about you before they come and work for you. So yeah, it's worth having a rigid process on that one, and I'm more than happy to talk to people about that. Obviously not here because you can't ask me questions because we're on my sofa. But you're welcome to email me, Thea at team-prime.com about this or other stuff, and I can point you in the right direction. But yeah, I think, really you should only be using agency recruiters, folks like me who charge a percentage on either really hard to find roles or because you're struggling with your inclusion because your own network all looks like you, so therefore you need someone outside of your network to find different folks. Or maybe you need to hire extremely fast, and your normal recruiter internal folks are just snowed on other things. Or maybe you have no recruitment experience and so you need to hire a recruiter. And I get all that, but if you can get an internal one, if you can manage to find that sort of 40 to 60k a year in your company to hire an internal one, I think the benefits are great. So I'd strongly think of it as the kind of really anything from a fifth hire onwards in a startup as an internal recruiter. I'm constantly surprised how many companies don't have decent internal recruiters. Yeah, and I guess that's it. Those are the questions I really wanted to cover. And sorry about the cat, but he's cute. He's good. I might go and get him actually as part of my wrap up. I'll hang around for a Q&A. I'll try my best to answer questions that you come up with. I'm always around on the email address I gave earlier, and I'm sure my link will be floating around somewhere on the lrug site if anybody wants to ask me any questions and things. There's obviously the opposite chat to this one, which is around, as a candidate, how should I be approaching being recruited, which I may do at some point, and I'll tell you about that if I do. But yeah, I mean, I think the main conclusions and takeaways I'd like everyone to have around recruitment and creating delightful experiences, particularly, is transparency, communication, make sure you're paying sufficiently well, and know what your problems are in your company and tell people about them up front. Like, do those 4 things and recruitment just becomes a joy. It really does. Like, I've had flowers sent. I've had people squealing on phone calls about being excited. I once had a sysadmin walk into a server room and genuinely scream with delight when he saw the terabytes of data being shifted across servers. Like, these are wonderfully joyous moments in recruitment where, getting a new job is great. I remember there was a chap who wrote to me from South America about 2 years ago, who I'd forgotten I'd dealt with, but he said to me, I just needed to write to you. 10 years ago, you gave me some advice about something, and you got me in my first junior job in video editing, and I'm now working on the latest massive Disney movie. And that's so good. Like, good recruitment is the thing that sticks with people. Like, getting people their first jobs or having a great boss or, having a delightful process is really important. But it just needs a bit of upfront time. And like I say, good communication. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for coming to my sofa talk. Be kind. I'm not good at talking. This is my first one. So any feedback, welcome. I'll get better. Bye. Cat is alive and well. Goodbye, lrug. Bye. I think I can unmute myself now, can't I? There we go. I didn't die. I was shaking this end. That was really funny. I actually had all of the things, even though I wasn't talking. That was okay. I'm still here. I didn't even have to run off or fake a server crash like I did the first time I tried to talk. So that's handy. Anybody got any questions?
So you're all forcibly muted by my iron will. So you can use the raise hand functionality in Zoom. So if you open the participants window, then there's a more button and you should be able to press raise hand if you have, and then I will ask you to unmute and you can ask Thea your question. So we have our first question. Oh no, something moved and I don't know where that button went.
Oh, my bad. I stopped screen
it's
sharing.
fine.
Sorry.
Right, I've asked someone to unmute.
Hi.
Hello. Excellent. Ask away.
So everything you said there, I think, resonated with all of us because we're all developers, and it sounded great from our perspective. Do you get many or any like weird stares from employers when you have this philosophy?
Yeah, loads. It's brilliant because it completely sifts them out of who I work with. So I have an ethos that my company's built on, I should probably say, because that might help some of the questions actually, which is that I only work with companies that make the world better, not worse. And I only work with programmers that I would employ in my own businesses if I were running them, because I have run product teams before. And it tends to mean that most of the companies, in fact, all of the companies I work with, have exactly the same ethos as me anyway. Like, the reason most companies come to work with me is because they want to get better. And then someone's gone, oh, you should talk to Thea, she's really keen on that. So I probably don't have to put up with as much crap as a kind of standard recruiter might have to. And I think that's an important point, because a lot of the recruiters you might come across are in an agency. So they're often bound by doing what their company tells them to do, not necessarily what they ethically would like to do. So if you find a good one, stick with the recruiter, not the company, if that makes sense.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay. Sophie?
Hi, Thea.
Hey, Sophie.
Found that really insightful. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. We have a small issue where I work. We're trying to recruit more diverse candidates, but it's proving to be a bit of an uphill struggle. I was wondering if you have any insight into the main reasons that diverse candidates, so sorry to a lot of people in this room, but anyone that's not a white male, give for turning down roles, or on the flip side, what really drives people to accept those roles from when they're like a more diverse candidate.
Okay, quick question back to you then before you mute. At what point are you not getting kind of inclusive pipelines? Are you not getting people apply at all? Or when you offer people, they're turning you down? Or when you've got people in the company, they're leaving? Or all of those?
I'm actually not 100% sure, but to keep it broad and interesting to everyone, let's say it could be any of those issues.
Okay, fine. So, I mean, recruiting, again, it's very much like sales. You've got a pipeline, right? Oh, I shouldn't have my screen on. It's like a funnel. So you need lots and lots of people in at the top so you can make that one decision down the bottom. A lot of people fail at the beginning, which of the top of the funnel, to get, minorities in, or people that don't look quite like them. And that's often because they're not spreading the word or taking the time to go into these communities and explain why that role might be fun to them. But also it's how the company's set up. It's so much more fundamental. If the board is full of white dudes, if all the managers are white dudes, if there's got to be the first woman or the first black person coming into your company, there's so many walls that person has to break down in culture that they've probably had to do 3 or 4 times before. And they're just exhausted. They can't be bothered. They're not going to, they'll just go to a company that's already kind of set that up from the outset. So you'll lose them there. Money's a big one, especially again in kind of minority recruitment. A lot of people have been underpaid or have not quite got the same ballsy attitude that a kind of more privileged white person might have. And so if you're not displaying money, like I mentioned before about salaries, that will particularly put off people who are shy to negotiate. So make sure you display your salary and that people can actually get it. And then interview processes themselves, make it easy, make it one, outlay it. So on your advert, for example, say that this is the job, these are the responsibilities, these are the problems you're going to solve. And this is our interview process. This is how much we're paying, and these are the benefits. Whether or not you allow part-time is really important, again, because especially if you're thinking about women, the caring responsibilities are huge around either elderly parents or children. Still, unfortunately, it does tend to fall mostly on women, not all women. I've met some amazing folks, amazing men as well. But if we're talking about minority recruitment, we have to try and think about everything we can do to increase that top of that funnel. And then if you're losing people as part of your process, please ask them why, and ideally with someone non-threatening. They will usually, people will usually tell you, or you can find out, like an exit interview, maybe they got another offer that was higher, maybe the product was a bit dull, maybe there was, too many people in the interview that didn't look like them, or there just wasn't inspiration. I could perhaps answer it more positively, which is what draws people to companies is seeing people like themselves achieving and doing well that they can look up to. So particularly if I'm hiring in junior women developers into companies, they're much more likely to go into a company that's got female engineering managers, for example. I mean, I talk about that because that was me. I was one, and I can talk about that in a way that I know about. The other thing that I did, so when I first started working with companies to hire, in particular, one company I was working with was interested in about how they deal with trans candidates, because I actually had a person change from male to female during a process, and so during an interview process, literally like between the interviews, and so that raised a lot of questions. So what I actually did was went to the trans community and explained my situation and how it was best for us to work with people during those processes. So simple things like face-to-face interviews became an awful lot harder, but it's something I don't have experience about. So I went and talked to them and then found out how they would like to be treated. So those kind of things, I suppose. The main thing is, though, is make sure you've got buy-in from the top. Your company has to have flexible working, has to have, you know, good money, good representation at senior level.
All right, Fred.
Oh, hello. Thank you for that. I was wondering if you had some advice around sort of the timing side of things. You mentioned, it's nice to be able to reply quickly to people. It's nice when things proceed, nice and snappily. I found sometimes when we're lucky enough that there are, one or two people interested, then you're not just dealing with one person at the same time. You're dealing with 2 or 3 people at the same time, and then obviously, they are in multiple interview processes at the same time. So you get this thing where maybe the person you like best, they're waiting for another company to get back to them. I mean, do you have any tips on how to sort of untangle that and deliver a non-shitty experience, even though some of it is somewhat out of your hands?
Yeah, I mean, all you can do is the best you can do, right? So long as yours is ticking over nice and quickly, it often will be in your favor, even if there is, multiple candidates on multiple interviews. If you're someone who is getting back to them within 24 hours and the other companies are making them wait a week, you're much more likely to be building a positive attitude. As a quick one, and you probably know this already, but just to be super clear, don't turn people down until you've made your offer and had it accepted, because if there was a second person that you really liked and you've just turned them down and then made an offer and the other person turns you down, you're kind of screwed. It's an obvious one, but it's an easy gotcha, so I'm just going to point it out. I mean, a kind of normal time to wait for people to come back to you on an offer would be sort of 24 to 48 hours. After that, I personally, as a recruiter, know that they're less keen on this job than another one, right? They may accept yours, but maybe the other offer didn't work out. So, most people that are quite keen on that job will be within 24 hours. So yeah, try and stick to it. You're more likely to snipe people from competitors by moving fast than you are to screw yourself over waiting for people, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Joel?
Can't hear you, Joel. I think you're on the wrong microphone. We can sort of hear you very quietly, like as if maybe you're connected via Bluetooth to a device that you've forgotten about. This is the famous Joel Chippendale that was in my talk, by the way, who I swiped the interview process off. Still can't hear you.
No.
Do you want to type it into the chat box? We could all rave while we're waiting for him. Oh, there we go. Go on, Mike. Get in there. Love it. Any advice for getting good feedback on your interview process? Yeah, good question. I mean, obviously ask. It's an interesting one because I'm a middle person and I have relationships on both sides. So it's quite easy for me because people will generally tell me what they think, whereas they're less likely to tell a client direct because they don't want to come across as bullshit or being mean. I would genuinely put it through user testing. I'd try and see if a friend of a friend would look at it or go through it. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because if people have a bad time, they generally won't tell you unless it's really bad. And if they have a good time, they hire you. No, maybe use a third party, I suppose. I've often thought there's a service in here somewhere. I nearly built one once with somebody where we put, like, you know how you get mystery shoppers? We thought about putting people through mystery interviews. So nobody knew which one. There would be one, like the company would do it, but somebody going through a process at the same time as any sort of hiring would be a mystery dev, but never came to pass. So there's a little free business idea for people there. But do ask. Try and make it anonymous. Maybe give a feedback form or something that allows people to pick pre-selected answers so it's nice and quick. But no, sorry, other than using a third party, because that's when you get the good crunchy stuff, you see. They'll always tell us. Anybody else? If anybody else has got an answer to that, by the way, can you put it in the chat? Because I'd like to know as well. There is a Bath company called Mystery Applicant. Yeah, that could be good. I mean, I think it's a really good idea.
Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question? While you think about that, I may use organizer's privilege to jump in with a question. We at our company once rejected someone because they were fairly belittling to a junior dev in a pairing exercise, and they had not been belittling to any, like they were. I interviewed them at another part, and they were very nice to me. I introduced myself as a senior dev as part of that, whereas they were quite belittling to a junior dev in the pairing exercise. And you suggested, like, oh, if it's personal, don't tell them.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm a big fan of, like, probably writing too much about their tech test and giving them lots of feedback, because in the past, people have come up to me in the pub after lrug and said, you reviewed a tech test, I didn't get the job, but like I learned a lot from it. And I was like, great, we can turn you into a not right now, a no now, but a yes, maybe later. That's cool. Whereas this interaction where this person like was horrible to someone, I kind of wanted to tell them that and make them grow from it, because like giving them advice about coding is also like, here's how you can be better in the future. And being horrible to someone, you kind of want to say this, like, but any advice on that as he fumbles to the end of his question?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, right? So technical stuff, always feedback, 100%, right? Just that's a no-brainer. The personal stuff, I'm with you, right? So I started out in my career always telling people, oh, well, you know, it's because you were late, or because your CV was formatted like, you know, terribly, or you talked about yourself too much, or, you know, you're belittling or something. And all it does is it makes people very defensive and have a bad view of you. Because often if they're that kind of human, they're a little bit past giving a shit about your feedback, to be honest with you. They won't care. But what they will do is go off and tell everybody who will listen how awful you are and how bad your process was and how dare that junior, and then find that junior's Twitter account and start atting them and doing other things. So it's extremely hard. The one I've come across the most, thankfully not for a while now, but about 5 years ago, there's a little batch of people who are pretty misogynistic in interviews with some people. And that was really hard, because I kind of wanted to say, look, if you weren't just such a dick, you'd have got that job, like, how dare you, kind of thing. The only thing you can do is really just not hire them, walk away and say, well, thank you for your time, and there was somebody better in the process. It never ends well. I've never seen it end well. And if anybody else can find a way that it can, then great. But essentially what you're trying to do is give them about 3 years worth of therapy and one line of feedback. And it's just, you just create problems. I've had people get all sorts of horrible messages and all sorts from trying to, you know, you're trying to help someone. It still happens to me even once a year, because everyone, well, not everyone knows me, but a few of you know me, and I'm very friendly and I try and help people a lot, and it often backfires sometimes. And as women, and again, obviously you're a bloke, but if it was a woman HR and you're trying to be kind to someone, let them down nicely, you end up getting asked out on a date, like stupid shit like that. So it's like, just technical feedback, keep it to the point. Don't put yourself in the firing line for people who don't really, you know, deserve your time and attention. If you really genuinely think this is someone who will care about that feedback and they would be mortified to know they'd done that, then, you know, by all means risk it. But no, unfortunately, experience has taught me, just get them out of your lives and out of your devs' lives as soon as possible. And your HR, you have to protect your HR. A lot of HR are women. And they're often doing the interviews, and your feedback might backfire onto them privately. So just, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Anyone else got another question for Thayer? Captive audience, come on. Anyone else? Doesn't look like it. So let's. Oh no, wait. Someone is. You are free to go.
Hello.
Hey, Javier.
I'm on the other side of the fence. Thanks so much for all your feedback, by the way. And I'm currently I just finished a bootcamp. I'm on the looking for roles. So I was wondering if you had any sort of advice on how, because we've heard on the other from a recruiter side point of view, but I was wondering if how you would see an applicant. If you had any advice on during the tech test or even before, how to approach a company, that sort of.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, there's definitely a whole talk in this, but a few quick tips would be, right, same thing with CVs, like I said, with job specs. So spend a bit of upfront time on it. Don't just list a history of this is what I've done, but instead think of it as a sales document for the role that you want. So this might be what I've done, but these are the things I'm really good at. This is where I'd like to go. These are the products I want to work on, right? People want to hire other humans to work with who are interesting, not a list of bullet points necessarily. Bullet points also helpful, but who are you too? Stick a paragraph at the top saying, this is me. I did this bootcamp because X, Y, Z, and what I'd really love to do is end up working on this kind of product. Do your research on the company. This kills me. Dare I say it, the last few months, I'll go months because that's broad enough that no one will know who I'm talking about. I put seniors into interviews where the company has come back to me and gone, they hadn't looked up what we did. And I'm like, you are kidding me. They had a briefing call with me for 15 minutes that said what you did. And that, yeah, they didn't look at our documentation. You know, if they've got a product, sign up for it. That's a really good start. Be aware of your value. By all means, drop me an email. I'm more than happy to tell you, like, you know, none of this stuff is charged, by the way. I should say anything that I've said I'll help people with, it's all free. Drop me an email. I'll help you work out what your value is, make sure you're asking the right value. And proactively go after companies, like the ones that you like the look of. Go after them and tell them why. Just be honest and earnest about it. You'd be surprised, especially at the junior level, how many companies hire based on like, wow, you know, this guy looks like he's got really good potential. He cares about what we're doing. We can train, we can mentor. The things where people fall down often as juniors, I think, is either asking for too much money. So I've had juniors looking for like 45K. No one's going to hire you for that. It's not going to happen. So, you know, think about 30, that kind of level, give or take $5,000, depending on how much you want the job. Think about laying out your CV. Even experience you don't think is relevant is relevant. If you've worked as a bartender in a really busy bar, that's really important to me. I want to know. I know you can work under pressure, you're trustworthy, and you can handle money, and you're probably really good with people, so you're going to be good with clients, right? If a company treats you badly, don't carry on interviewing with them. If you feel a red flag, if you feel a gut feeling, that's not you being junior. That's like a really good flag that they're not the right one. The right one you'll just be, like I say, delightful is the right word. You'll just be like, oh, I really want to work with them, and they really want to work with you, and it will happen. But most will just keep going. Don't give up. We need you. You'll make it. You know, you've gone this far. You've gone through a boot camp. That's more than probably most people on this call. We all just picked it up as kids and ran with it, and people were silly enough to give us jobs. Whereas you've, you know, gone out and tried really hard. So don't give up. You'll get there.
Cool. Anyone else? I'm gonna wobble my head while I count in my head.
Do 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 do. Boom.
All right. With that, let's call it there. Oh, Joel, have you sorted out your microphone this time? Let's find out. Let's find out.
I have, I think.
Hey.
Have I? Thanks very much. So I was just wondering, there's all sorts of tools out there to help with hiring. You know, I can't even remember the long list of them in terms of doing coding tests, in terms of filtering candidates, etc. Thayer, do you have anything to say about any of those, and you know, recommendations or advice? Or
Yeah, totally. It's one of those things where it depends how big you are and how much money you've got to blow on these kind of things. I mean, if you're tiny, so let's say 0 to 5, then a Trello board is brilliant, right? It's free. You already probably know how to use it, or you've done something similar. But just keep track of people and already start tracking your return on investment for where you found people, right? If you put a job ad out and someone came back, track it. If it's word of mouth from somebody, track it. If you talked at an event, track it. Because as you go back later, you'll know exactly where to put your time and energy into your recruitment. If you're a bit bigger, so let's say 25 people company, maybe, I don't know, 6-person tech team or something, I think there are things like Workable and is it Bamboo HR used to be around, and some other little things like that were really good. And they're great because they just do stuff for you and they help you. They almost kind of push you through a sort of process in a way, which can be quite helpful if you're starting out. Although Workable, which seems to be what the majority of my clients use, does this really creepy thing, and all candidates should be aware of it, which is that when you're a recruiter or an internal recruiter and you upload a CV into it, it scrapes your CV and then looks for you everywhere in social and adds it to your profile. So even though you put your CV to the recruiter and it didn't have anything about your Flickr account, your Twitter, or your, I don't know, Last.fm, God, showing my age now, any of that kind of stuff, it sucks it up and puts it there for people to look at. It actually actively points at it, which I find really gross. And I don't think there's a way you can turn it off. So just be aware of that. If you're really big, if you're kind of 50 to 100 people, there's a thing called Greenhouse, which is brilliant. And it's kind of like Salesforce, but for recruiting. And it's like major. You can track sort of hundreds of candidates and like make notes against them. You can do interview scoring up and down, but I think it's relatively expensive, a bit like Salesforce. It only kind of works when you're bigger. Online tests and things, I get asked about them a lot. I've never had anybody recommend anything to me that they loved. I often find the best tests aren't actually tests. They're more like chats, or where someone gives somebody a bunch of code and the documentation and some of the documentation's wrong. And then the people are asked to tell them what was wrong in the documentation, because it immediately allows people to think in like their language, you know, spoken language, whether it's English or whatever, to work out what's wrong in the code, which can sometimes be easier than trying to unpick the code and translate it back into, you know, English or whatever. Also, code tests that are relevant to the actual thing you're building. Like that sounds super obvious and yet no one seems to do it. The amount of times I see a shopping cart code test for a company that's building some product that doesn't have a shopping cart is baffling. Yeah, I find people that kind of make bespoke code tests and just take that time to spend a couple hours thinking of something, or it could just be extending something. Like, here's a thing, how would you extend it for this? Just take 2 hours to extend it. But yeah, so software wise, everyone asks for it. I haven't heard of any that's been suitably announced. Other software for recruitment, LinkedIn's pretty good. I mean, it's annoying as hell and nobody likes to hear from people on LinkedIn, but if you're actually actively looking for people, that's a good place to start. You can pay about 80 quid a month and you can, you know, then spam like 30 people, I think it is. Of course you won't spam, I'm using that jokingly, but it then allows you to actually do proper searches and look for people, and it shows you who's actually looking for work. But no, I think, you know, I still use, I'm not even joking, a Trello board for all my clients, and I just add them into it. It's dead easy. Everyone knows how to use it. It's free. Just track everything. That's my one tip. Track. Nobody does it. Everyone should. Where did people come from? When did they start? What did they think of the interview process? How long did it take from start to finish on the offers? That kind of stuff. Just track it. Track all your data for recruitment.